Okay, we're going to talk about loops today. I'm going to use the chapter in the book as kind of my guide to make sure I hit everything here. Um, so the reason why we have loops and repetition is if you need to do something over and over and over again. This is really powerful in programming because rather than writing things out by hand, one line at a time, for every time you need to repeat something, if the thing that needs repeating is something that happens the same over and over and over again, then you can use a loop instead and save you a lot of time, effort, and pain by having the computer do the repetition instead of you. Computers are really good at repetition, and so it's good to take advantage of that. So there's different kind of loops. The chapter identifies them as pre-test loops and post-test loops. And the test in the loop is the thing that tells the loop that you're done with the loop. You're done repeating. Okay, so there's some test that the loop executes each time it goes through to see, am I done yet? No, I'll do it again. Am I done yet? No, and I'll do it again. Am I done yet? Yes, and so I jump out of the loop. So a pre-test loop means that that the computer does the test at the beginning of the loop. That means loops happen at least one time. I'm sorry. With pretest loops, the loops happen or they get tested at the beginning, so they may or may not happen the first time. But if they do, then they start the loop up. With a post-test loop, it's what I said before, where the test happens at the end, and so the computer will execute the code at least one time because it doesn't do the test until after it's done. And when it checks, at that point it decides whether it's going to go and repeat what it just executed or not. Now there's different kinds of tests. Um, the most common is the counting test right here. And counting just means as part of the loop. So a counting test would be a loop that you say you know how many times you want it to happen. So you want a loop to happen 10 times, and so it's going to count each time it does it, and it checks to see if 10 times has arrived, and then at that point it jumps out. You can also skip numbers. So you might count from 0 to 50, but you're counting by tens. And so it goes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. It jumps out. A sentinel control loops, as the book says right here, is a loop that has some other reason for jumping out of the loop. So, for example, say you're waiting for the user to input a certain command before it jumps out of the loop. That would be a sentinel control loop because it's not based off counting. It could go forever, assuming that the user never types in the right word. But as soon as the user does, at that point, it jumps out of the loop. So sentinel, it's what sentinel as like a guard. It's watching for something specific before it does something, before it finishes the loop. Okay, there are several different kinds of loops, and we'll go through all the big ones. The while loop works like this. So I've got my code here. So a while loop starts with the word while. And the way you can think of it is while something is true, do the loop. Okay, so let's have a variable called count. It's less than 10. So we'll make this loop go 10 times. All right, so let's declare a variable at the top, var count. We'll start at 0, and then we're going to say we'll have some sort of output, so I'll put that in a variable too. Var output is equal to nothing at the beginning. Then we'll say output plus equals the count plus times through, and then maybe a break. Oops, I need my semicolon here. count, we'll increment count by 1. Then at the end, we'll do document.get element by ID, output dot enter HTML is equal to output, our variable output. Okay, so what does this loop do? So we initialize the variables right here, and then count is less than 10. Well, it starts out at 0. This is true. Count is less than 10 when it's 0. And so it's going to start building up this string that's saved in output. You see the plus equals here? That means it takes whatever is already in output and adds to it. So you've done that with math before, but with strings, we know that using the plus sign just concatenates the string to the end, making it bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what the plus equals does too. So it says, all right, take anything that's already in output, add, concatenate the number that we're on, and then concatenate this little message right here. So each time it goes through, it'll say, so the first time it'll say 0 times through breakpoint. The next time it goes through, it says 0 times through breakpoint, and then it adds 1 times through break. And then the next time through, it already says 0 times through break, 1 times through break, and then it adds on top of that 2 times through break, and it goes all the way till count is equal to 10. Now count has to increment here, has to go up by 1. Count has to keep track of the number it's on. Otherwise, if count never changes, this variable will always hold the value 0, it'll always be 10, and this loop will just go on forever. It'll never stop. And that's never what you want to do in a program. You always have to have some condition to make it stop, or else the program will just go on forever and the user won't be able to use it. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's bring it up in the browser here. Let's grab the file. Okay, I have a thing called Do It. I'll bring up the debugger. Sources. I put my breakpoint right here so we can see what's going on. I hit the button, stops at the breakpoint. So we see that output starts with nothing in it, it's just an empty string. Count starts at 0. While count is less than 10, is count less than 10? That is true. So it goes into the loop. It says, okay, we'll take whatever's in output, and we're going to add the words 0 times through break. I'll make this a little bigger so you can see. Right here, okay? Then we're going to increment count by 1, because this is a counting loop, and it's a pretest loop because we do the check at the beginning. And now count is 1. 1 is still less than 10, so it goes in here again. Now it adds to the string 0 times through break, and then 1 times through break, just like I was saying earlier. Increments count again, and it keeps going, adding messages to the end of the string until it gets to, that's 9. Now we're on 10. Is 10 less than 10? No, it's equal to. So we're going to jump out of the loop and then output it to your div tag. And this is what we have right here. So it happened 10 times, starting with 0, going to 9. Programmers usually start with 0. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and I think next week, when you get into arrays, you'll understand. But arrays start with their first position is indexed at 0, and so it's really useful to do most of your loops starting with 0, because a lot of times we are indexing arrays in our loops. Okay, that's a while loop. Now let's do the same thing, except we're going to do a for loop. So I'm going to take this out. Now, for loops are probably the most common loops out there. Count is equal to 0. count is less than 10, and count plus plus. Now that looks a little cryptic, doesn't it? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to bring our while loop back up. All right, so you can see the difference here. So in the while loop, you declare your variable beforehand and set and give it a default value of 0. You do your pretest right here, and you do your increment right here. Well, a for loop lets you do all that stuff all in one line. So you don't have to have it in different places, and you're less likely to forget it. Because it's more succinct, this is a much more common way of doing loops. So in this case, output, we'll just do the exact same line. Count plus times through break. Okay? So this right here does the exact same thing as this while loop right here. Why do we have two different loops that do the same thing? Because while loops can also be used for other things. They could be used in a sentinel situation where you're looking for some condition to be true in order to keep your loop going on. A for loop is only for a counting loop, and so that's why you have the two different kinds. But usually our loops are counting, and so usually most programmers use for loops a lot. Okay, I'll go ahead and comment this out so you can see the for loop in action. Okay, saving it. I'm going to bring this up, refresh. Okay, we still have our breakpoint. Hit the breakpoint. So now output starts with nothing in it. Count starts with 0. Okay, count, we actually didn't even have to do this count is equal to 0 because right here, counts, this initializes it to 0. It starts count where you want it to start. Then here, it does its check to see if it's less than 10. And if it is, then it'll go into the loop. And then at the end, after it goes to the loop, it does its increment. Okay, and you'll see it here. So you count is 0, it's less than 10. It goes into the loop, starts to build your output string. Now you can see how it's highlighting the plus plus. Now it does the increment. And then now it checks again. Now count is 1. You can see that right here. Now count is 1. So it goes in, does it again. Now count increments to 2. You can see right here, count is 2. And it's still less than 10, and so it'll keep going until count is equal to 10. Then it jumps out. Okay, a little tip and trick here. If you're going to start your loops at 0, always do the less than on your test. That way, this number can always be the number of times you want to go through the loop, right? Because if you start with 0, you want to end right before 10, so you can get that 10 times. If you start your loop at 1, then you want to do count as less than or equal to 10 in order to get 10 iterations. Because when you start at 1, you want it to go through 10. Okay? So 0, if you start with 0, use less than. If you start with 1, use less than or equals to. Okay. So we'll let the loop finish, and we got the exact same thing as we did before. Okay? All right, now we're going to look at yet another kind of loop. This one's called a do while. And the way do while is different than a while do loop is that it's backwards. It's a post-test loop. So you start with the word do, and then at the end, while, and then you do your test here. less than 10. Okay? So we need to, I'll just copy and paste this to everything here. So again, we declare a variable on the outside and set it to its default value. Now this one, it'll go through and it'll say do. All right, I'm going to do it the first time like that. And then once it goes through, then we'll have to increment our count so that it'll go do. So it'll build its output, then it'll increment count, and it'll check to see if count is still less than 10. If it is, it'll do it again. All right. And the biggest difference, like I said a minute ago, is that this one will always do it at least once before it even checks whether it should do it or not. So this does the check first to see if it even wants to go into the loop at all. This one will always do it, and then it checks to see if it wants to do it again. Okay, go ahead and save this. We'll refresh. I'll hit the button. All right, so initialize the variables, count as 0. It's going to start building the string 0 times through, break. Now it increments count to 1. It's 1, and now it checks. Is 1 less than 10? Yes, it is. So it does it again. Okay, 2, 3, and it just keeps doing it until count is 10. 10 is not less than 10, it's equal to it. And so it goes ahead, does its output. Just like that. Okay. All right. Let's look at the book to make sure I am covering everything. So we did for loops. Did do while loops. We talked about zero-based counting. That means our loops tend to start with 0 and have that less than. And mostly that's because of arrays, which we'll get into tomorrow, or next week, I mean. Skipping loops, so you don't have to only count by 1s, you can count by 2s or 3s or 4s. So what we can do here, in our loop here, we can plus is equal to 2. What will happen here? Now it'll start with 0, and it'll go to 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and then it'll stop. Okay, we'll refresh this just so you can see. I'll just let it go. 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, because count increments by 2 every time instead of only by 1. Likewise, you can do the same thing with your other loops by just changing your incrementer. So on the for loop, this is the part that increments it. So you just change that and set plus plus to plus equals 2. It does the same thing. Likewise, on our while loop, you plus equals 2. And now every time it increments by 2 instead of 1. It could be 3 or 4 or 5 or any number that makes sense in your program. Okay? Infinite loops, we talked about that. You want to make sure that your loops have a time when they're done. Okay. For example, in this scenario, I'll zoom in here so that it's a little easier to see. Var is equal to 0, then while I is less than 5, it says the word, it alerts a hello, but it never increments I. So I will always be 0, and it will always be less than 5, and it'll just say alert hello forever and ever. Likewise, in this example, in our for loop, var is equal to 0, I is less than 5, and then this person forgot to put the incrementer after the I is less than 5, the I plus plus. And so it never increments, and it goes forever, right? Okay. So you can see how these have the incrementers. All right. Finally, break. So break is a special word that says, you know what? At this point, I just want to be out of the loop. I don't care what the condition says. I don't care what the test says. I don't care what the increment says. I'm just done. So you can do something like break. And what will this do? Well, it'll go through and it says, oh, count is equal to 0, count is less than 10, does its thing, increments count by 2, and then it says break, which means I'm out of here. And then it goes. I'll show you that here. Refresh. Do it. We'll step through here. Count is equal to 0. Output. Oh, I must not have saved it. Let me go ahead and save it. Okay, then we'll hit refresh again. Sorry about that. You can see right here how we have the break. Okay. It sets it to 0. Count is less than 0. Output does it once. Increments the count, and then break. It's just out of there. Just like that. So you only get it one time through. Okay? Sometimes you have some weird condition that you want to check for, and if that does happen, you just want to be out of the loop. And that's when you use a break. Okay? Okay. Repetitive strings, that's what I was just showing you with where you build a string and make it bigger and bigger and bigger. Use that plus equals. So you take everything that's in output, that's a string already, and then concatenate more string to it. Concatenate means put strings together. It just puts the string at the end like that. Common mistakes, you can look at these here, but this common mistake is they forgot to increment the loop. On this one, we start I is equal to 0, I is greater than 3, then I plus plus. Well, if I is 0, I is never less than 3, and so it doesn't even go into the loop. It doesn't go in at all. And so what was the point of doing the loop in the first place if you never go into it? You should make sure you're using semicolons instead of commas. These are supposed to be semicolons. They're like their own little statements, and at the end of statements you put semicolons. Braces. You look at this and you said, well, the loop is obviously supposed to be both these lines, but without the braces, it doesn't know it, and so it won't do both lines, and then your loop doesn't work right. Don't put your semicolon here, because what that tells the computer is, while I is less than 3, okay, I'm done with my loop. There's nothing in there. And then you end up with an infinite loop because it's not incrementing. So this says this is the end of my loop. So if you have a semicolon there, it never gets to this part. Okay. Likewise, for loop, you don't want to put your semicolon before your braces like that. That's what the braces are for. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you understand loops a little bit better, and you'll be able to do your assignments and your quizzes and everything else, and you'll be confident doing them. Good luck with everything.